ANA eLearning Academy is brought to you by CDN Graysheet, a trusted source of rare coin and currency valuations since 1963.
Today we have Past President Walt Ostromecki, who is going to be presenting on Beauty and the Banknote, the Feminine Touch. You will be muted during this presentation, so if you have any questions that arise, please put them in the chat or the Q&A, and I will read them to Walt at the end. And without further ado, here is Walt.
Okay, well, thank you all for attending. I appreciate it as much. For those of you that are joining us today, I hope you'll enjoy this little tour about the exploits of women around the world. And the original program was titled Women on World Currency, but I wanted to narrow it down to women that we know or actually had names. And so we'll take a look at it. We'll find that individuals from nuns to queens, to artists, to scientists, to writers, social, and women who were reformers, women who were rebels, have been portrayed on world currency. Now, most of the modern ones, as we'll discover in just a moment, began, come on, there we go, began around 1940. Okay, so I added the touch to it, as I call the feminine touch, which actually highlights the women. Unfortunately, since ancient times, women have made and influenced world history, politics, and culture, as well as impacted numismatics. Just look at the United States, for example, of how many women in the Treasury have had their touch in our currency and coinage that has been issued over the years. Unfortunately for women, in most cases, they have been slighted, considered inferior to men, stereotyped, plain ignored, and when it comes to recognizing their heroism, talents, contributions, and trailblazing efforts in many fields within their country on behalf of all womanhood. This program is also presented because this is the last day of International Women's Month, and we'll meet one of the co-founders a little bit later in the program of Women's. As I noted earlier, women are mostly generalized when it comes to being pictured on currency over the years and fit into two basic groups or categories, if you want to call them, through about the 1930s. These two groups, symbolic groups as I call them, were allegorical and stereotypical forms. We won't be covering these, but I'll show you examples of these as we're going along. So the first one is allegorical, and it's a female personification style or example. For example, here we have one from the Bank of England in 1957, a £5 note. It's an allegory example of what? Britannia. You'll notice the arrow. So there's a woman, but it doesn't have a name. It doesn't have like a Logan Curtis. Be nice to have hers there, I'm sure. Another allegorical example here is of Miss Liberty or Liberty, and this is from San Marino. It's a 200 lira 2016 note, and Miss Liberty of San Marino is pictured right there off to the right. Next, the stereotypical role representation, and to me these are not flattering when it comes to women, although they are unnamed generally. And they're often doing menial work, taking care of children, grocery shopping, marketing, you know, all the stereotypical roles that we might do. They're also seen in native dress, hats, making rugs, pottery, doing laundry, tending gardens, etc. An example here is a stereotypical example. Oops, I've gone to number 2. Whoops. Sometimes my mouse gets away. This is a stereotypical example from Albania, and it just shows women harvesting grapes in general. This is a 1976 three-leki note. And here's a second example from the Comoros Islands, a woman in native scarf or dress. It's a 1997 2,500 francs note. Now a challenge for you folks to think about, and if you have a chat button there, you can answer in if you like to here. So, who was the first actual named woman to be featured on a piece of currency that was issued? I'll give you a few moments to think about that. But the actual person, in other words, let's say we're looking for a Kim Kick, actually pictured on a note. And we'll find out we have one of those at the end of this presentation. So who was the first actual named woman to be featured on a piece of currency? And I don't see any thoughts. Well, let me help you with your selection. No, there's my screen at the top. It was not Martha Washington. That was in 1891. No, it was not Pocahontas in 1875. But in 1862, on a not as yet recognized independent country, we find the answer. And hopefully by now you probably are aware of it. The answer is Lucy Pickens, First Lady of the Confederacy. And she was pictured on a $100 Confederate note of 1862. So those of you that thought Martha Washington, well, not quite. Here's the second one. And that's, I'll use our US currency because I took the one out for the Canadian group I gave this program to a couple of weeks ago. Second was Pocahontas. She's on the reverse of a $20 national US banknote series. This is an Alabama series, but she's kneeling and being baptized. And of course, here's our third one, Martha Washington, on the 1891 $1 silver certificate. Now, most of the currency you see pictured here are in my collection or in my holdings. There are a few that I do not own because of the expense. One expensive one I do own, and we'll get to that a little bit later as well. Martha Washington, whoops, come on, there you go. And again with George Washington on the educational note of 1896. So here we go again for you folks to take a challenge out there, and I'm sure your men that are viewing this will enjoy seeing a lot of women on the program, and you certainly will. Can you name the actual woman who holds the title, the most featured woman, named woman on world currency or banknotes? For an example, if you unscramble the letters there, IEIQ, you have an answer. And of course, it's Queen Elizabeth and her 69-year reign so far. And she ascended to the British throne late in 1952. And she was first depicted on British banknotes in 1960, which depicted her as a very young queen. Of course, you want to know the information about her. There's her full name. But do you realize that having the record, the British Commonwealth of Nations, as of 2021, is made up of 54 countries, and each country bears her portrait. Nauru was the last one in the year 2000. So here we have, oh, doggone it, somehow my mouse keeps getting away from me. Here's examples of the currency. On the left, you have a 1960s 10-shilling note of the young Queen Elizabeth. Note the small crown, the very proud face, and almost portrait. Uh-oh, my associate arrived here. All right. And 2020-21 specimen. This one is a coming note for Great Britain. It's a 20-pound note. And notice the beautiful, intricate detail. Notice how the Queen has aged a mite over those 69 years. But this release is forthcoming probably around mid-year is what the individuals say. So what was the first British Commonwealth nation to place Queen Elizabeth's portrait on their currency? And again, we'll help you. Australia, which joined the Commonwealth in 1931, and it appeared on their currency in 1956. Note the denomination. Now, this was actually a specimen piece, never issued, but it was interesting what at the time they were going to call them 5 royales. kind of interesting. So this is a specimen I do not own because it was extreme rarity. Okay, well now let's turn our focus to some of the women who have had the honor to appear on world currency. And we'll go through it alphabetically. And I'm sure you'll be surprised to see the individuals as to why their countries decided to portray them. We'll start out, of course, let's start out with Argentina. Any of you singing the song right now? Oh. And of course, Argentina, we have here a 2012 100 peso note for Maria Evita Duarte de Pation. And her lifespan was 1919 to 1952. And she was the heroine of the working class who distributed through her foundation food and needed medical care to the country's poor and working class. Unfortunately, she died at age 32. She is affectionately known as Avita, as her chorus refrain from the musical Today. Next, we'll move on to Australia. And there are several here, and I just pick each individual so you get a chance to see what countries and how many different women were honored on world currency. But this is 1995, a $50 note with Edith Cowan. And she was around from 1861 to 1932. And her claim to fame is she was a social reformer who championed the causes for children and women. And she was the first woman elected to the Australian Parliament in 1921. She was also founder of the Children's Protective Society. And of course, to the right of her portrait on the note, we found the children from that protective society that she took on. Whoops. Next, interesting here. We have a 1994 $20 note, Mary Riley, from 1777 through 1855. And she was the only multimillionaire businesswoman and shipping magnate in New South Wales during the late 1700s. And she is actually responsible for developing Australia's world trade and commerce. It's amazing. Next, we'll move on to Austria. And there's several here as well. And some of these date back a few years. This is a 1960 1,000-shilling note with Bertha, here we go, Felicius Sophia Frau Frei von Sutter, 1843 to 1914. And she was a beloved Bohemian poet and novelist and abhorred the ravages of war that it inflicted upon people. I can just see her face here that tells it all about what she thought of war. Here we have a 1969 10-shilling note of Angelica Kaufmann from the period of 1741 to 1807. And she was Austria's most famous neoclassical portrait artist of the 18th century. She had a wide influence, including Goethe, believe it or not. Next, we have another one from Austria, 1997, a 500-shilling note from Rosa Mayrader, 1858 to 1938. And her efforts were focused on the ways to improve the imbalance between men and women in all cultural, social, and political areas at that time. Next, we have a couple, and I want to focus on the lady there on the right. This is from Belgium, 1992. It's a 10,000 franc note, and it shows Queen Fabiola from 1928 to 2014, along with King Bedouin. So we have a couple here, and we'll see some more later on of where the husband and wife were portrayed on world currency. Next, we'll move on to Bolivia. 1896, the 1990 series notes, 5 bolivars from Adela Zumido Alvarado from 1854 to 1928. And she is the most famous, in fact, the only famous Bolivian poetess, feminist, and educator. She wrote poetry under the name of Soledad, and she is credited with founding the country's feminist movement. And we're talking here again in the 1860s, 70s era. Next, we have from Bulgaria, excuse me, a 1991 2011 note with the Duchess Servus Orisia de Solana. She's one of the older women that's actually named and portrayed on a note from 1189 to 1277. Little is known about her, unfortunately, other than that she was in the top tier of noble women at the time. This is unusual. We're talking about the 11 and 1200 areas that women were not really recognized. And yet here we find one. And this is one that our neighbors to the north enjoy, Canada. It's a 2018 $10 note, Viola Desmond, from 1914 to 1965. And this is the Rosa Parks, as she is considered, of Canada. And she was a Black descendant, as it notes, a businesswoman and civil rights leader. In 1946, she had the audacity not to sit on a bus, but to sit in the white-only Roseland movie theater selection. And she was arrested for this crime. She was convicted of a tax violation and fined, get a load of that fine. She was fined a 1-cent seat price difference. And of course, she wasn't pardoned for this act until 2018. She won Canada rights, civil rights victory of Black equality, much like Rosa Parks did here in the United States. Next, we come to Chile, a 2009, the 14 note, the 5,000 peso note, Lucia Gudi y Alaguala, from 1889 to 1957. Poet, diplomat, educator, humanist. She wrote under the name of Gabriela. Mistrial, of course, and the mistrial was what she was after, focusing her attention on, the mistrials that the justice system in Chile had at that time. She won a Nobel Prize for Literature in 1945. Comes one of my favorites. Here we go. Here, take a look at this. This is a note from China, 1960, Huanyan, of Ling Zhan, aka the Tractor Girl. She's the first Chinese woman, called model operator in this case, to operate a tractor in 1959. And she set the stage for Chinese women to work in previously men-only fields of endeavor, whether they be physical, educational, or even political. She was honored in China in 2020 on her 90th birthday. Now let's take a look at her honor for 90th birthday. And of course, we see her portrayed here at age 79 in 2009. As a tractor girl, she's changed a little bit, I would say, but she could still drive a tractor, I'm sure. She is pictured actually holding the note that she was given by the government in honor. Oops. Colombia. Here we find that a 2012 10,000 peso note of Policarpa Salvaretta, 1795 to 1817. And this is a true heroine. She was a Colombian heroine of independence movement that started in 1850. The unfortunate part about it, she led the fight for free independence. She was captured and executed on the 14th of November in 1817. But she has had a tremendous impact and still does today on the nation of Colombia. Next one, well, I think you'll enjoy it, but I'll preface it just a little bit before. This note, in the condition you see it, is one of the most expensive foreign banknotes with a typical woman, I should say, portrait on it. The note here was bought many years ago by this collector, and today the particular note in the grade, and they only exist in AG to G, and about a half a dozen uncirculated ones have shown. And what I'm talking about is this from Costa Rica, a 1931 202 colones note of the Mona Lisa. Now that's a named woman, isn't it? But this particular note here, when I first purchased it back in 1980, was $425 for this condition. But you find them frayed, you find them with holes, you find them well worn, and most of them are disappeared. I've seen them for as high as $10,000, offered even in good condition on eBay. We'll move on again to another from Costa Rica, 2007, 10,000 colones note of Emma Gamboa, actually last name Alvarado, from 1901 to 1976. An educator and idealist. She advocated for equal treatment of all people in Costa Rica, and she helped reshape the Costa Rican Constitution. As a result, she was declared Benemitra La Patria by Congress, by the Costa Rican Congress in 1980. I hope you're also enjoying all the beautiful coloring and designs that are in these banknotes, as well as the women pictured on them. Here we have a 2020, a more recent issue, a 20,000 colones note of Maria Isabel Caraval Castro, 1888 to 1945. And she was the most prominent Costa Rican influential woman through her writing under the pen name of Carmen Lyra, L-I-R-A, and co-founder of the Workers' Farmers Party, which later, unfortunately, was renamed the Communist Party in 1931. But she was an advocate of the working class people and the farm. I'm going to ask you now that we move on. A little silence, please. We will next be in the presence of a canonized saint. And here we have from the Czech Republic, 1997 to 99, 5 kurum note of St. Agnes of Bohemia, 1211 to 1282. And she was canonized as a saint by Pope John Paul, November 12, 1989. And simply by invoking her name at the time, we're talking about the 1200s to early 1300s, the countrymen there helped overthrow communism in the Czech Republic. God, it's dynamic how a woman could have that influence and have that power. It had to be ordained through a higher deity. Next, we have Denmark, a 1997 to 88 500 kroner note, and Mrs. Charles Rybig. This is interesting too. Her time period was 1858 to 1926. Her first Christian name is really not known. In fact, very little about her is known as well, but she is an actual person, and she was the gifting benefactor of the Dane Society and starting it back in the mid-1880s. Next, we have one I'm sure all of you are aware of here, the Arab Egypt Republic. Let me get a drink here. And this is probably the oldest dated, women hate to see their date, but this is the oldest dated woman to appear on a note. This is a 1940 5 piastres note of Queen Nefertiti. And we're talking here the time period, sure, 1370 BC to 1334 BC. She looks good for her age, don't you think so? And her claim to fame as a queen is that she supported the one god over the multi-gods of worship in Egypt. And of course, that eventually changed the whole Egyptian religious culture. And now we come down to one that we talked about a little earlier, but here we have one from England. It's a 2017 10-pound note of Jane Austen. This is on the back. The front has the Queen on it, and the lower note is the reverse of the note with Jane Austen pictured on it. So this is the first time we see two women on one particular note. And she's the famed prolific English novelist of much acclaim. Her most famous novel, Pride and Prejudice, The Industrial Revolution. Did you know, or did you realize that she also wrote about numismatics? I bet you can't guess her famous book on that. That novel was entitled, believe it or not, Sense, spelled with a C-E-N-T-S, and Sensibility. I wonder if there's any numismatic collectors of those Sense and Sensibilities out there. Here we have her portrait being released on a 10-pound British note and was previewed in front of her home. And I also have a wide collection of women on medals and tokens and coins and other objects throughout the world. Here's one on a 2-pound coin from 2017. And the last ANA convention also had a woman pictured on it. If you haven't picked up the medal, this will be your opportunity to do so as well. Here we have another from England. And this is a 10-pound note. Again, these are on the front, and obviously I put both notes so you can see them. We have Elizabeth Fry from 1780 to 1845, Quaker, English social, and prison inmate reformer. I don't see a job description of that today. But through the efforts working with Queen Victoria for better and more human treatment of prisoners, she managed to secure legislation and a change in the prison system where they were just treated like animals and suffered dearly. Another from England. Of course, you all probably know this name. You probably heard, especially any of those of you that have been on COVID recently. You've experienced a nurse. Can't imagine what it would have been like to have a nurse during this period of such as Florence Nightingale here on a 1980 10-pound note, but she was from the period of 1820 to 1910, a British nurse and statistician. She kept a lot of figures. Founder and trainer of modern nursing skills developed during the Crimean War in Turkey, and she was dubbed by the title of Lady of the Lamp by the wounded soldiers who she visited in the evening hours every day that were suffering. And she also developed, here we go, the Nightingale Nurses Pledge, which is still used worldwide today. And I won't read it all. I'll give you a chance to digest a little bit of it, but I solely pledged myself before. And she goes on here, and every nurse still takes this same oath today. Okay, we'll move on to France here. And of course, you all know the lady in front. Her husband is behind. Here we have Madame Curie on a 1995 500 cents franc. And that's the way the French system is set up. They're cent francs. So they use part of a little English name there as well. And she was born 1867, 1934, and she was born in Poland. And she immigrated to Switzerland and to France, along with her husband, Pierre, and they all worked on, as you know, radioactivity. They were dual Nobel Prize winners for their activities in physics and in chemistry. Beautiful note. And we're going to digress statewide or countrywide just for a second here, because Madame Curie is also pictured on a Polish note from 1989, a 200 zloty note, but she is pictured by herself. And there's quite a difference between that and the previous design. Facial characteristics are still the same, as we'll see. Again, we'll move on. And now we'll go into Deutschland, we'll go into Germany. And here we have a 1980s 20 Deutsche mark note of Elizabeth Tauscher 1473 to 1517. And there is no historical account about her. Her portrait used on the note was done by the famous Renaissance artist Albrecht Dürer in 1499 when she was 26. Beautiful note again. Also Germany here, we have a 1989 100 Deutsche Mark note. Clara Schumann, aka Clara Joseph Wyack, from 1819 to 1896. And she found a way that women could make a living out of the simple things such as music. And she made her living as a concert pianist. And she founded the Schumann factory back in 1881. The name exists today, but it no longer has or makes pianos at that particular site. Another one here from Germany in 1989, 500 Deutsche Mark note of Maria Cecilia Mariana, 1647 to 1717, excuse me. She was the first German, or actually German woman, entomologist who studied insects up close and drew them with plants on paper in watercolors. She was also dubbed the first ecologist. I think most people find it interesting. Wow, there's one of the insects on there as well. Why would a woman want to handle bugs? My daughter scared to death of them. She's 33, and she screams and there's a spider in her room or a mosquito flying around. But yet here we find and here is a depiction of one of her insect drawings. This happens to be on what we call an argemone. This is a prickly poppy, yellow flowers, and it has the various beetles. Not much left of that particular plant after the bugs get done handling it. Okay, we'll move on here to another German individual. And we have a 1991 5 Deutsche Mark with Bettina Petriano von Arnim, 1785 to 1859. And she was simply Germany's most famous Romanticism era writer. Wonderful face there. And next, I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this program that we're going to meet one of the co-founders of the International Women's Day movement or month movement. The next one is, and it's funny because the individual comes from a country that doesn't exist anymore. We knew it as East Germany, but it was also called the DDR. And we find here a 1971 DDR mark note of Clara Zetkin, 1857 to 1933. And she was honored by the German Republic at that time as the most international socialist communist world leader. I don't know how the two go together, but they sure did here in the 1990s. And she was the co-founder in 1914. I'll bring up the next slide here. She was of the International Women's Day in 1914. And this is regularly celebrated. Here's a poster of her on the left. And the establishment of her with Louise Zeitz was her co-founder or co-supporter. And this taken hold in this whole month of March worldwide is celebrated and honors women. Yes, you too. Next, we have one here from Guinea, a 1981 reprint of a 1960 issue. Now, if you note the date here is issued below it, little blue arrow. The green arrow shows the reissue year, but these were overprinted with this particular date, 1981. And the reprint, this shows it's a one silly Rahajapa Mafori, 1910 to 1976. And she fought for women's right to vote in Guyana, and believe it or not, won it. And we're talking here in the 1980s. So it unfortunately happened after her death, but it was heard. and she was bestowed the honorary title of the most beloved women of Guyana. For those of you that are kind of sensitive to X-rated themes, unfortunately, the next one from Iceland bears an X-rated theme. So if you want to close your eyes or you want to focus on the note, you may do so. But this is a Iceland note from 2002, a 5,000 kroner note. This is the one name that I love. Did you ever think of pronouncing that? Thought my name was bad enough. Berenegagdar Jondere, 1646 to 1750. And she was a sex symbolism artist. Interesting, she was the daughter of an Icelandic priest. And she painted her art as a symbol of expression of male dominance, bondage, and perverse behavior. Sounds like an early Marquis de Sade to me. Her paintings often sell for millions of dollars when they're on the market today. Now, love that hat, love the face. Okay, we'll move on now to Indonesia. We have a 1985 10,000 rupiah note of Lady Ran Ajak Kartina, 1879 to 1904. And she was the heroine. Here's another heroic woman, a heroine of the island of Java who led the fight for equality of women's rights, and believe it or not, won it. And we're talking here in the late 18 and early 1900s. Fantastic. Again, I ask for a moment of silence. Another venerable canonized saint will be in our midst in just a moment. And here she is from Ireland, a 1985 £5 note from Sister Catherine Macaulay, 1778 to 1841. And she was the founder of the Sisters of Mercy in 1831. She was declared a venerable saint by Pope John Paul in 1990 for all her duties and cares for womanhood, especially women that were ill and that suffered all sorts of various debilitating mental faculty problems. Next one, someone we probably all know in our time period as well. This is from Israel, 1987, a New Shechem note of Golda Meir, 1898 to 1985. And she was known by the affectionate name as the Iron Lady of Israel. I'm not too keen in that. But believe it or not, you know where she was born? She was born in Kiev, Russia. And she was the fourth prime minister of Israel and the only woman to date to be elected to that position. She certainly mothered Israel in its early development as a country. In fact, she was a great educator. And the next slide shows an educator versus a teacher. Now, she defined the difference. And by being an educator and of 41 years here in California, I learned the difference too between an educator and a teacher. The teacher is one who has a program, arithmetic, reading, writing, and so on, and fulfills it consciously and feels that he, notice the word he, not she, he has done it, his job. An educator tries to give children something else in addition. And the key word here is enthusiasm or spirit, something to motivate them as we see today. But she must have been a marvelous woman. I wish I'd had her as a teacher. Another one here from Israel, 1973, 5 lira note of Henrietta Zold, 1860 to 1945. And actually the first woman to appear on an Israel banknote. She was a Jewish Zionist leader and founder of Hadassah, the Zionist women organization in the United States. And she spoke out first on an issue that is still causing problems in Israel today between Israel and Palestine. She was an outspoken Palestinian Israel problem-solving advocate. What a title. Looking for a binational solution. This matter, of course, is still unresolved today. Tried to do it. Maybe it'll take another woman to do it. And in here in Israel, 2017, 100 new shekel note of Rachel Bluestein, or Sella. She got married later on, 1890 to 1931. And only the third woman to appear on Israeli banknotes. She was a devout Zionist idealist poet, and she got much of her Jewish acclaim through her poetry, which is well read, even in Jewish church circles. She was called the mother and founder of modern Hebrew poetry. Guys, think of all the work that these women have been doing to be honored. There's another one in education. I love Miss Montessori here. We have from Italy, 1990, 1,000 lira banknote, Maria Montessori, 1870 to 1952, a teacher who developed the educational method that builds on the way children learn rather than memorization. We've adapted that here in the United States a number of years ago. We in the US have applied this as well, and there is a private Montessori system still throughout the United States and other countries today. Can't imagine. Next, Jamaica. Here we have probably one of the first, I guess you want to call it, rebel leaders. Here we have on a 2005 note, $500 note, the Queen Nanny of the Maroons, 1686 to 1755, and actually the mother and founder of Jamaica. You see, she was a Jamaican rebel leader who fought the British enslavement of the people and who won and humiliated the mighty British Empire. I can imagine this was a time when Britain controlled probably 3/4 of the world. And her famous words probably resonate somewhere with you as well. Out of many, one. Sounds like an e pluribus unum to me. All right, and here we have a picture of her. And this is what the youngsters there are taught. I took this off of Facebook. But there's talk about a child of Africa, freedom fighter against slavery as well. Okay, Japan, we're getting about a little more than halfway. I hope we're not boring you, but it takes about an hour to cover all these, and you'll probably be able to see it and review it later on to get more detail and information should you be interested. Here's Japan, 1881. One of the older notes to actually have a woman pictured on it. It's a 1 yen note of Empress Jingo. Her period was 169 AD to 269 AD. Long life. One of Japan's Ona Bugesa warrior class women, which means she actually could fight. You just see her. You see her attacking you with like a Harry Carey thing and her saber. And she ruled his region after her husband's murder by the people. And she sought revenge on them for it. Of course, she wasn't very popular at all and eventually passed off the scene. Second is another woman from Japan. Here we have a 2004, 5,000 yen note, Hibisho Higuchi, 1872 to 1896, and famous Tokyo author of many books. Brought Japanese painting and literature into the modern world. And next we have an example of that. Here's some of her beautiful, this is a self-portrait on the left of her, and her most famous book, In the Shade of Spring Leaves. If you read Japanese, I'm sure if Joe Bowling is watching, he can certainly read this text as well, but it also has been translated into English, and it's a great inspirational book. All right, Luxembourg, we have here in 1955, one of the older notes, modern era, a 20 francs note with the Grand Duchess Carlotta, 1896 to 1985. And she reigned from 1919 to 1964, one of the first actual women to appear on currency from an earlier period, from the 30s to 1964. Malawi, we have a 2013 20 kwacha note of Rose Lomanitha Chimbano, 1928 to 2016. She led the fight again here, a woman leading the fight for independence of the British protectorate called Nyasaland, which was near what was called Rhodesia at that time during the lower part near the Horn in Africa. And she won again. The country became Malawi in 1964, and she was given the title of the Malawi Independence Woman. Fantastic. Notice the little coins and other designs next to her portrait here on the right side. I hope you're beginning to see the influence and rule of women that they've contributed so many areas. Here's one of my favorite too from Malta, 1986, a 5 Maltese lira note of Agatha Barbara, 1923 to 2002. This lady, again, to my delight, is a woman school teacher who went on to become the nation's first and only woman president to date. She was elected in 1982 to 1987 and served and built up a great financial influence within Malta and the British Commonwealth. She was widely acclaimed as just an outstanding financial individual. Here we have Mauritius, 1985, a 20 rupees note of Lady Sholjam Julnath, 1939, and she is still living. The first living woman, aside from Queen Elizabeth II, to be pictured on a banknote, and we're talking here. Oops, here we go, sometimes it's mouth. All right, here we have a Mexico, 1969, a 5 peso note. Almost doesn't look like a woman, except for the dress that she's wearing here. We have a 5 peso note here, Josefa Ortiz de Dominguez, 1773 to 1829. First appeared on Mexican banknotes in the 1934s, and this was carried over to a later printing here in the 1960s and 70s. And she was a revered and most influential woman in Mexico during that rough colonial period time. But she's also considered the mother of Mexico's nationhood. And again, I'm going to ask for a moment of silence to bow your head. None here is taking down names for those that might be a little bit rowdy or sleeping in the pews. Here we have from Mexico as well, 1984, a 1,000 pesos note of Juana Inés de Asaba y Ramirez de Santilla, 1648 to 1895. She was a child prodigy, poet, dramatist, musician, and she advocated religious authoritarianism over elected or spiritual lineage or lineage of rulers and dictators, of course, during this period of time. She became a cloistered nun in 1669 and lived out her life as such. But she wrote The Dreams of the Soul as a cloistered nun, and she shared her dreams as a spiritual uplifting to those in doubt and those facing all sorts of troubles in Mexico. Netherlands, there's many here. This is one of the earlier countries as well to have various queens or individual women portrayed on their notes. This one is a 1941 5 gulden note with Queen Emma, 1858, 1934. She was regent to daughter Queen Wilhelmina, the Grand Duchess of Luxembourg. So she was also, remember, Luxembourg didn't exist as an independent nation, but was part of it. So this is one of the first women to actually be over 2 different countries, that of Netherlands and that of Luxembourg. Next here, we've got a 1941 to 43 25 gulden note of Princess Wilhelmina Sophia Hedwig Nassau-Diaz, 1709 to 1759. And this is the woman that actually began the Netherlands royal lineage, excuse me. First wife of stadtholder in the Netherlands. The Netherlands was becoming its own particular country at this time in the mid 1700s. All right, 1943 here, a 10 gulden note of Queen Wilhelmina, who we talked about just a bit ago. 1880 to 1962. This woman, though looks a lot like Queen Elizabeth, at times people have said, made the comparison, but she was the one that inspired Dutch resistance fighters during World War II. And she used radio broadcasts from England to do that, to inspire the troops there to hang on and to fight the Germans. She reigned 58 years. Now Queen Elizabeth has already beaten that. Another one, this is from the Netherlands, Eugenie, 1954, 100 gulden note of Queen Juliana of Netherlands, 1909 to 2004. And she ruled Netherlands for 32 years. She abdicated in 1980 to daughter Beatrice and ended all the Dutch colonization of the West Indies and Suriname. The beautiful birds. I love the reverse on this note. That's why I pictured it. New Zealand, 2013. $10 note from Kate Shepherd, 1847 to 1943. She was a prominent member of the of the Australian suffrage movement, which led to women getting the right to vote. Look at this. Be surprised. The date was 1893. Women in New Zealand had a right to vote. Those in the United States had to wait, unfortunately, until the 1920s. But do you believe the first year that they had the right to vote in New Zealand, that 65% of the women in New Zealand voted in that election? Nigeria, 2006, 20 Niagara note, which has writing in 3 different languages, and I pointed them. There's 3 different dialects of Nigerian language, and their notes cover all 3 of those, and they're all noted by the little yellow arrows here as well. But Lady Kowali, 1924 to 1984, and she was Nigeria's most famous pottery maker. She opened up her worldwide Nigeria pottery sales office there in 1951, and visitors from around the world came to see her in action. And the note portrays her actually making pots. But it's a central landmark today. A wonderful woman. Simple but powerful influence. Here she is with the note, and there's the picture of her actually working in her place. And she also has a British award right through here. I can't remember what it was. She was given an Outstanding Citizens Award by the British government. Norway, 2005, 500 kroner note, signed Sigrid Undset, 1882 to 1939. Norwegian novelist with an affinity for writing about life in the Middle Ages. She wasn't from it, but she sure wrote about it. She won a 1928 Nobel laureate. Okay, here we have again 2016 100 kroner note from Christian Fogstad, 1895 to 1962. The great Norwegian soprano opera singer, dubbed the Swedish voice of the century, rated 20th among all-time great worldwide opera singers. We'll see some more opera singers coming up too. But look at the talents that women have been showing us so far in this particular program. Here we have 2 sisters from Paraguay, 2009 note, 200 Guardianas note of Adelia and Cecilia Sperati, 1865, 1902, 1868 to 1938. These 2 sisters pioneered and set the cultural standards which symbolize pride in Paraguay. And women today still follow those particular styles. They set a stage and made a great influence. And one last reverent moment. And we will go on here to Peru, 2009, 200 soles note of Isabel Flores de la Olivia, 1586 to 1617, known as the Rose and Saint of Lima, Peru, for her dedication helping the poor and disease afflicted in Lima, canonized by Pope Clement X on April 12, 1671. Portugal, 1968, 5 escudos note, Infantana Maria Dona Adele, 1912 to 2012, a beloved protectorate of Portugal's arts. This is a tough note to find. Mine is well circulated here. Scotland, well, they've started a program 2 years ago in 2019, and they're completely redoing and reviewing their currency for denomination issues through 2022. And all their currency denominations will picture and honor Scottish women. Think of that tribute. This particular one from Scotland I like. It's a 2012 10-pound note. But notice how the dimension, look at the artistry, the dimensional, 3-4 dimensional effect on the particular note. It's a 10-pound commemorative note of Queen Elizabeth's Jubilee. These are tough to come by. They're expensive too. They'll run you $50, $60 on eBay. But it features also the portrait of several other queens as she's aged. Scotland, here's one of the the 5-pound sterling note of Nan Shepherd, 1893 to 1981. Get it right yet. Much revered Scottish poet, novelist, wrote mainly about nature hiking and adventures, because you've got a lot of time to think while you're hiking through nature and looking at the beauty surrounding the flora, the fauna, the people, and the fresh air. Here we again have another redesign from Scotland, 2016, a 10-pound sterling note of Mary Somerville, 1780 to 1872. And Scottish female astronomical scientist of acclaim who was shunned and ostracized by all the European male scientists in the 1800s. Reason? What do you think? Now think of the time period, and this was their statement. Science is not the proper place for a woman. Well, I think it's long overdue. She overcame as a result and was the first woman admitted, believe it or not, to the Royal Astronomical Society in 1835. Another one from Scotland, 2019, a 20-pound sterling note of Kate Cranston. Many of you ladies watching probably will enjoy this particular individual from 1849 to 1934, but leading Victoria figure in the development and promotion of tea houses as social gathering places. I'm afraid today they might be closed because of COVID, but Miss Cranston's tea houses cropped up all over Scotland. It seemed like there was one on every block or every other street, and many in Glasgow alone. Some still exist today. You can actually buy on the internet her particular tea brand from the Scotland itself. Marvelous individual. Here we have Serbia, 2005, 200 dinara note of Nadis Palavic, 1873 to 1915. And she was the noted Serbian impressionist and fauvist. First woman pioneer, believe it or not, to take up photography of the scourges of war in battlefield photography. She looked at it, it was just amazing, and it hurt her soul deeply that people didn't realize the cost of war on the civilians and the fighters on both sides. It was just maddening. South Korea, 2009, 5,000 won note of Shindamdong, 1504, 1557. Noted Korean artist who developed the Cheongdu art genre. What's the Cheongdu art genre? Well, let's see what she did. Painting of plants and insects. Notice the difference. These are watercolors. This is from 1524. These are watercolor designs. Almost looks like eggplant. We don't know for sure. Spain, well, you probably all remember this one from Spain. 1957, 1,000 piastres note of Queen Isabella. The Queen is on the right, by the way. 1451 to 1504. And her husband, Ferdinand, on the left there, unified Spain by marriage. Believe it or not, her most famous thing was not 1492, as we'll discover, but the fact that she created the Inquisition to snuff out church heresy. However, she did financially bless Columbus's voyage in 1492 to the New World. And as a little break for levity here, here's the two views of Columbus's famous discovered. Who discovered who? Columbus and Native American version of an historic event in 1492. The year Native Americans discovered Columbus lost at sea. Well, we can move on. Here we have Spain, 1979, 500 pesetas notes of Rosella de Castro, 1873 to 1888, the first notable woman author of Spain. And she published It Was a Disgrace to Be Illegitimate, sharing her life story of what it was like to be an illegitimate child during the mid 1850s. Sweden, 2011, a 5 kroner note. Whoops. Oh yeah, where am I? I got my sequence is off. Wait a minute. Okay, that's 2012, the 20 kroner note of Astrid Lindgren, 1907 to 2002, Swedish author of children's books, and she introduced to kids worldwide stories about a very fictional character. You see that fictional character portrayed just to the right of her portrait. And of course, who is that individual? We all know her as Pippi Longstocking, no S. There's an early edition on the left of her book, a copy. I don't have it in my collection, but I have a friend that collects Swedish authors. So he managed to send me a copy of it. This is the Pippi Longstocking that our children through books have learned. Sweden also, we've got here's the 2011 50 kroner note, Johanna Maria Lind. We all know her as Jenny Lind, 1820 to 1887. Swedish opera star called the Nightingale. P.T. Barnum brought her to the U.S. in 1850 to 52 for a tour. Can you imagine in 1851 paying $225 for a ticket to just see her? She made $3 million in her 2 years in the United States on tour. Decided that's good enough for me. I'll move on. Also, I wanted to share with you in 1850, this is a Jenny Lind New York token of that particular time. Here, difficult to find. Sweden, we're almost down there. We got 1991, 20 kroner note of Selma Lagerlöf, 1858 to 1940. Renowned Swedish woman writer, first woman to win a Nobel Prize in Literature in 1909, and she was actually 83. For what? Rostaberga Saga. And I'll let you read it. I'm not going to share, but it's a fantastic book. It's been translated into English as well. Now it gives the audience, which I've put to sleep. Now we're going to wake you up. If you're not asleep, can you identify this Swedish woman pictured on this note here? And the note is a 2012 100 krona note to help you with your thought process. I'm used to interacting with an audience when these are given live. So it says, I held citizenship, dual citizenship. I'm famous for my smile. I was blonde. My first job was a barbershop soap latherer girl and got paid 50 cents a day. In the year 1826, I got my start and reigned supreme for 6 decades. If you haven't come up with an answer, here's a movie portrait, which will give you the individual's name, Greta Garbo. This says Matahari. So here we have a note. See, I covered up with the arrow, the film note here to do it as well. Okay, we're coming. Now this is Switzerland. It says portrait style, not landscape style when it's printed. But it's a 2010 5 franken note of Sophie Tabor, 1889 to 1943. Acclaimed Swedish artist, sculptor, textile designer. She employed geometric designs in all her work. And as a result, the artist that did her note design employed the same geometric, they're up here near the top of the note in the center, design in her portrait as is pictured on this particular note. But she's the mother of what we call Dada art. Do you believe using concrete in making artwork? Doesn't say anything about her making statues, but she used that particular method. Syria, this is one of the few Middle Eastern. The first one we've probably seen so far next to Egypt, which is an older one. And here we have from 1889, from 1998 to 2000, 500-pound Queen Zenova, 240 AD to 270 AD. And she ruled Palmyrene, later known as the Empire of Syria. She was a warrior queen, like some of those depicted by Hollywood. An insurrectionist who fought the Romans and unfortunately lost her independent empire to them as a result. But she is considered a heroine in Syria. And again, here we have another dual one from Thailand here. We've got a 2004 80 baht note, a Queen Karik, and she is still living. 1932, her husband was King Rama, and he's pictured on it as well, and he has passed away. She is most beloved and revered by the Thai people, and she suffered a stroke in 2012 and no longer appears in public, but she still receives guests regularly from the general public, even at her bedside, and she is the most beloved individual, as I noted, for the people of Thailand. Tunisia, this is another one here in the Middle East. Here's a 2005 to 2008 10 dinar note from Dido Miso, actually Elissa. We're talking the period 840 BC to 760 BT. This is the second oldest woman pictured on a banknote. I don't know if women like to have their age dated through banknotes, but unfortunately, some of them have that here. Legendary founder of the Queen City of Carthage. And a modern one. This is a new one from Tunisia, came out late last year. A 10 dinar note. Johanna, 1909 to 2000 cent. She's the latest woman you pictured on a banknote issued March 2020. She's the first Tunisian woman to receive a university degree, first modern era woman physician in an Arab world, first Arab woman to be honored with a portrait on a worldwide banknote. Ladies, you're making great progress for your contributions and exploits. Ukraine, 2007, 2000 hryvnia note, Elissa Yukranka, 1871 to 1913. Beloved Ukrainian woman, scholar, and poet. It's all that's known about her. Now we come to the United States. Of course, this hasn't happened yet, but the US has proposed designs to redesign the currency and to place Harriet Tubman. When it happens, it might happen during this new administration. We'll see what the Secretary of the Treasury decides to do. But this has been put on hold, but this is what one of the new 20s is scheduled to look like. Jackson, take from the front to the back, outside the White House. And as we're winding down, if I want to keep those awake, what is US paper money? Now, here's two fun examples. This is paper money. Notice the gold seal. This is debt. Notice the green seal. What's in your wallet? Uruguay, we have 2011 1 mil pesos note from Juana de la Abaron, 1892-1979. And you Ugandan lyric poet who wrote about nature and love, and that the latter was a growing problem because there was so much infidelity we're talking about here in the early 1900s of marital infidelity. And Venezuela, 2011 20 bolivars note of Luisa Carranza de la Armenda, 1799 to 1876. Another heroine, a woman that led the cause for freedom. And she was the heroine of the Venezuelan War of Independence in 1819. And of course, they did win independence, and she's the first woman entombed at the Pantheon Nacional there in Caracas, Venezuela in 1876. Well, with that, we've come down to just about the end of our talk. I know it's been lengthy, but it's hard to believe that women from all facets and all areas have contributed greatly to world history within their own countries. And I know that things are changing too, and maybe in the United States. I would like to share here at the end a candidate as a possible successor to be used on some kind of US banknote. And this, of course, is with the ANA Executive Director, Kimberly Kick, pictured here on the left. But while I may not have my picture on a piece of currency as yet, but I do have my own post office. This is from my collection here. There's a post office. I collect $2 bills that are all postmarked in various cities. I've got close to 22,000 in my collection. It's a never-ending side collection as well. But here it is from Kimberly, Wisconsin, April 13th, of course, with the zip code. And with that, I'll add the feminine touch to the end of this presentation, your speaker being in the middle. And, oops, we didn't do it there. Anyway, I thank you for your time. If there's some questions, if there's not, Logan, I will turn it back to you. And
okay, well, it looks like we don't have any questions, but thank you for your wonderful presentation. I know as a woman in this hobby, it kind of feels like we could be left out sometimes, and
yes,
it's
you do.
wonderful to see people specifically focusing on women, and it was a wonderful presentation.
It's kind of lengthy. I usually do it in 2 parts, but I figured this was scheduled for Phoenix, which didn't take place. So anyway,
Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining us. You all have a wonderful day.